部屋を明るくして離れてみろよあれ
2018 was the year the final season of Fairy Tail aired. Although it was supposed to air later on during the year, I kinda crave for another piece of Hiro Mashima work. So I scoured the internet for new manga to read, and I so happened to fall into the lap of several new works that kinda had potential. Amongst them was Samurai 8, which was done by the creator of Naruto, Fire Force, and Platina End, and by sheer luck I found Eden Zero. Looking into what the manga was about, I found out that it was yet to be released, but the character designs were already released, and the response was mixed. The people who were angry at the designs were like he copied them, and the people who laughed at the designs were like, I would like to give the series a chance because the man has kind of copied designs from his previous works, as shown by Eden Zero copying Fairy Tail copying Rave Master in some form of way. And I mean, look, the majority of the characters that are technically important either look like a mix from the previous series or just straight up plucked from the previous series, but the surrounding world around them has totally changed. And so to begin with, this whole series is kind of hinged on the idea that it has to be a sci-fi that's kind of mixed with fantasy, and I really like that. It also has its own power system and its own world building that is kind of impressive, but I feel like it can do better. So let's talk about the similarities between this one and its previous predecessor, and since I actually like sci-fi mixed with fantasy, let's get into it. The similarities between the two shows are kind of similar. If you look at the beginning, they're kind of somewhat similar. If you remove the character interaction and burn it down to a lump of coal and close your eyes and look away and play the whole series, you'll say, yes, they're kind of really similar. And they technically plucked characters from Fairy Tail and placed them into Eden Zero and into space. I mean, look at Happy. He's technically the mascot for the previous two works and several other characters, but I honestly don't really mind that because the story beats and how the story is moving forward seems to be somewhat different. And you might say, hey, you're just acting like a fanboy. Well, I am probably a fanboy, but let's move on. There really aren't a lot of similarities between the series, besides being the same mangaka who's actually doing the work or the same art style being technically drawn. There's really not really a lot between the series because different characters seem quite similar, but they often are different characters. The differences between the series are kind of different, really. You can really see them if you actually watch the series. They're really quite different. So let's get this out of the way, and as far as I've read and watched this whole series, I did not catch a whiff of anything related to the power of friendship. So you're not gonna see that in fights. Probably. Maybe you're not. I'm not sure, okay? Depends on how you feel, but you're probably not gonna see the power of friendship in work when people are fighting. Now, to the real points. So far in the story, both the manga and the anime, as far as I've read, both have different story beats compared to the previous work, and ironically, both shows start off with the goal being a trigger for how the show or the adventure starts. So both Lucy and Rebecca kind of somewhat look similar. Maybe they might be sisters, but anyway, they both somehow end up meeting the main character through different means, one being completely luck and the other one kind of making choices to go there. And Lucy somehow met Natsu while she was getting charmed by the fake salamander because she wanted to join Fairy Tail, but he ended up getting beat up and then she paid for their lunch and then she had to be saved later on in the first episode of the series. And if you go with Shiki and Rebecca, is that she actually chose to travel to the Granbell Kingdom with the intentions of getting content for her B-Cube channel, where she was greeted by robots, and then she decided to go on a quest where she found Shiki in a forest, and basically him meeting a human for the first time, he was quite odd around her, and this sparked him following her around throughout the whole time, and then she ended up cutting his hair amongst other things, and then the robots started acting weird, and then they both had to leave the planet because manga. Yes, because manga. So most, if not all, characters in the story are different people who share physical similarities with the previous manga characters, and I'm feeling like you're kind of tired of me and I feel like you're kind of tired of hearing me say they share similarities, but they're quite different. Most, if not all, the characters, they have different goals, okay? They might be related to the story or somehow tied to another character's goal. And let's kind of look at Shiki, for instance, and let's compare it to Natsu, who was the previous MC of the previous story. The background of the two characters is quite different. One sort of lost their parental figure at a young age after spending a lot of time together, while the other kind of woke up one day without their parents being there because of this, both characters ended up having different perspective from the beginning of the show. with Natsu looking for Ignil at the beginning of the show and somewhat being content with what he found in the guild of Fairy Tail, and Shiki, who was just content on staying on Granbell and having some weird ass obsession with making friends, and ended up making friends with the entire robot population of Granbell. That was until Rebecca showed up and the robots started acting up and he had to leave due to robots acting up, like I said. And they were just trying to respect Ziggy's wish of having his grandson actually leave the planet to actually live out his own dream. And another reason was because the robots kind of had their time running out and they were soon to begin perishing. So Rebecca and Lucy, while they sort of met the main characters either through dumb decisions or by luck, and looking at both of the characters' backstory, you kind of can see one had a dysfunctional family life, with the family being actually dysfunctional after the death of the mother, and later on she started writing letters to her mother at somewhat of the end of every main arc, or some parts in terms of some episodes. She kind of wrote letters to her mother even though she passed on. And then if we look at Rebecca's side, we don't really know a lot about her past or her personality in terms of her past, because it's kind of all tied to her meeting Happy, her not having parents, and then her meeting Professor Wise after Happy sort of got injured heavily and him helping her out. And I mean, look, both of the characters have a mean streak, but I really don't remember Lucy yelling at her enemies to die while grinning ear to ear, and I don't remember her being very impulsive to the point of cutting someone's hair without actually permission. But I bet both of the characters will be willing to put down all things to protect their friends, even though one of them might be delusional. That is okay, because now I actually spent quite a lot of minutes on this, like probably hours and hours, kind of debating on whether I should add the magic system, because once I actually read through it and I actually talked about it, it kind of seemed more like magic. So basically ether gear, or ether, let's start there. Ether is basically the source of all power, basically magic if you were to use iron scientific terms, and it can be found in everything from humans, buildings, robots, etc. You can find it basically anywhere. So let's move on to ether gear, which it basically utilizes the ether flow from the user's body and rearranges it by turning it into power, thus giving the user the ability to manipulate certain elements like wind, making swords, or machine configuration. And the only downside to this power is basically having your wrist tied up or having been hit by EMP wave. And technically the first can be overcome by training, or basically more training, and then the second is kind of more tech related, so I feel like it might be kind of more harder to solve than the first one. And technically, side note, on the topic of training, people can technically train the ether gear, although it takes time. For some people, it actually takes a month to actually be able to use it professionally. Upon actually training it, you can train it even further so that you can awaken it, and it will reveal more abilities for you, and then you become stronger, and then you go beat up someone, because beating up people is fine if it's fantasy, not in real life. Don't go beat up people. Anyway, since the powers can be passed on to someone, it can also be taken by force by using special devices, as shown by several other parts in the mangas that I kind of don't want to talk about because it kind of spoils things for people who want to actually go into the series. Well, honestly, it does sound like magic, and I like how they handled the power system, because the previous time it was dragons. You had to be trained by dragons in order to be strong, or get an implantation of lacrima in order to be strong. Now you gotta have that scientific or that sci-fi aesthetics of the show that kind of has a feel of fantasy, and that will result in ether gear. And the first one we kind of see in the whole show is worn by Shiki, which he got from his grandfather, who was the previous demon king, who was Ziggy. Okay, I'm gonna be real, the world building could get better, and as far as I've read the whole series, as far as I've read up until the point I am, which is ahead of the anime, it has taken heavy influence from the sci-fi genre with a dash of fantasy, and it seems that the author hasn't forgotten his fantasy roots, which most of his works stem entirely from fantasy. I mean, look at Granbell Kingdom. It's basically fantasies incarnate into a theme park ran by robots, which kind of sounds similar to another theme park that I shall not mention, but that's where magic happens, where you can go on adventures and other things, among other things. And if we finally go further than the Granbell Kingdom and the Granbell planet, basically you're gonna find the second planet, which is shown where they technically go to, is the Blue Garden planet. And whether you look at the planet or the city itself, which seems quite futuristic, it does kind of look like a metropolis from our world mixed with science, mixed with sci-fi with a dash of fantasy. Like the Meteor Touch Guild, which hosts some beekeepers amongst other things, it kind of does act like what you'd expect from a guild, which is basically a trade center for information among other things, as you can just get your information so you can go to a certain quest. And even later on, it does kind of nudge at the old series by joking that it's kind of really not a family. So that's not what you should expect from a guild in this type of world. And even if you go further than that, if you want to go further than that, you can get places that are entirely digital, such as the place where Hermit is going to be found, or places where it rains solid ether. And all of this can be found in the background or in the Sakura Cosmos, which is one of the few cosmos that are mentioned as far as I've read, if you exclude the Aqua Cosmos, which is mentioned a bit later on in the series, like above chapter 40s. That's where they start mentioning the Aqua Cosmos, but it's only like a small bit. And the best part of this whole series are the spaceships and the space monsters, which I kind of consider under, world building, because they're part of the world, as you do. I mean, have you seen them? Look at the Carnivage, a space monster that is so badass that it can eat the time of the planet and bring it back to probably 50, 60, 70 years back in the past. In the most simplest way I can explain it, it can be like it brings back the previous save files of the planet, and by bringing that save file of the previous parts of the planet, it essentially eats up anything that happened after that. That is crazy. And if you actually go even further outside of the cosmos, you will be lucky enough to meet Mother, who is considered a great mage that might give you any power. She just sounds like Dragon Ball's incarnate, okay? And that's cool if you ask me. That is really cool. So, what did we learn from this poorly written video? While the story isn't perfect, and some people might think it's just stole characters from Fairy Tail, and that's fair. Someone might have been drinking too much vodka while drawing characters, okay? That might have happened. But the characters are written in such a way that they're fleshed out to be their own individuals with different personalities. And sure, there might be some overlaps, but there are overlaps with other series, so we don't point that out. It's actually quite a good thing, because I kind of really like how the characters are written, because they're written as their own individuals. And sure, the beginning of the story might be a bit rough around the edges, but I guarantee you that the story might get better as the story progresses. And honestly, I hope it really gets better at world building, like spending more time on a single planet, maybe learning the intricacies of the planet and the natives who live on the planet. But I'm just satisfied with what is currently shown. This show, in my opinion, is a better show than Fairy Tail. As a successor, it does justice. As a successor in terms of writing, that is, it does justice, because it shows that he chose to use the criticism which he got from Fairy Tail to improve upon his future works. But that's all I'm gonna say. If you need more nudging for you to watch this series, I'll just say this: if you like space, spaceships, weird creatures that eat your save files, and beings that can grant wishes, this is basically the show for you. If you mix Fairy Tail, Radiant, One Piece, if you stretch it a little bit further, you basically have the show amongst other things. Please hit that subscribe button, and thank you for watching.